First of all, I think I know many faces here, but just in case, my name is Jessica Griffiths and I'm the lead coordinator of the Open Society Association. Tonight I'd like to welcome you here to this discussion on 21st century democracy. Thank you for braving the rain, and first of all I'd like to give the floor to the MP Shahid Zaki, who's going to give a short update on the reform agenda. Is he in the room?
Yeah,
okay, sorry. So if I pass on the floor to you, and then we'll move on to the next speaker.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Eid Mubarak to all of you. First of all, I would like to thank the Open Society Association for inviting me to speak on the topic of the democratic reform progress in Maldives. Well, to begin with, I would like to say that since the end of March this year, I am no longer ambassador for Singapore. I suspect that I was stripped of the portfolio due to the strong political support I was having at the People's Majlis, the Parliament. Whereas you may know that I am an independent member. When I was ousted from my diplomatic post, I was offered another desk job at the Foreign Ministry. However, I have since sent a letter of resignation to the President the very next day, for which I have yet to receive a response, which has elapsed almost more than 7 months, I believe. What is more even interesting is that the Foreign Minister, who was spearheading the New Maldives group at the Divehera Youth Party, also resigned in August, blaming the government for delaying the democratic reform process. In my tenure at the Majlis, I have enjoyed all party support for my views and opinions, where I have always supported factual discussions and upheld the truth and reality. I am a pro-democratic and committed to eradicating all social evils, including corruption, backbiting and blackmail. I prefer to remain an independent MP because one of my reservations when the Majlis decided to allow political parties was that it should be facilitated through law. 2 years on political parties still function under regulation enacted through a presidential decree, even though the bill has been tabled in the Majlis, it has yet to be approved. Well, coming back to my topic, I will be very brief and short. A new constitution that upholds the modern democratic processes is nearly completed. Only 3 chapters have not been finalized. It is hoped to be completed by the year 2008, end of January. It will bring about a monumental change to the way the organs of the state come into power. For the first time ever, candidates from political parties will be competing for seats in the Majlis and for the post for President of the Republic. When the Special Majlis, the Constitutional Assembly, came into recess this month, one of the contentious issues was the formation of a transitional government to oversee the election of local governments, MPs and the President. Of course, several bills have to be passed before this election can proceed. And perhaps the most crucial process to ensure fair and just elections would be the appointment of a capable, trustworthy, independent election commissioner. Almost all elections that were completed within the last 2 to 3 years have been allegedly riddled with irregularities. The government are highly unlikely to concede the terms of the coalition of other political parties and civil society to form a transitional government. They may indeed have a point that I can sympathize. In fact, I feel that it might be best to establish an election council comprising members from all political parties to first and foremost oversee the election of the local government and members of the parliament, according to the procedures and safeguards provided by the new constitution. From then on, the newly elected Majlis can take over the role of establishing a judicial services commission and other independent commissions as well as electoral commission, culminating in the presidential election in October to ensure that the newly elected chief executive can take presidential oath on 11th of November. Thus, the duration of election council will only be 2 to 3 months. At most, when best still would avoid the stagnation of the development projects in the country that the government accuses the coalition proposed model would lead to. To conclude, I sincerely hope that the transition to multi-party election would instill among Moldovians the true spirit of democracy that would lead the nation into the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Honourable Shahid Zaki MP. Now I'd like to present to you, or invite to the stage, Honourable Mustafa Hussain. Mustafa Hussain will introduce our chief guest this evening. Mustafa Hussain was twice ambassador to the UN representing the Maldives, and in the interim period between this post he was Minister of Health. I've been told that he's well known in the community, as partly as his position as co-founder of the EPS school, and also his work with young people up until now. So I'd like to present to you Honourable Mustafa Hussain. Thank you.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. I would like to say a few words in Divehi language first, because I think we are being heard outside of this room, so I would like to express our greetings to the people. Miedeki awon menge ufawi aloha yidwas kama bayaga ni hafla adwasa farataka awon ge ikhlas dari tahniya ay mubarak badirat tukar. Before I go to perform my responsibility for this evening, I would like to welcome our chief guest, Mr. Evans, the Honourable Evans, and members of political parties, heads of parties, parliamentarians to this gathering, and it is an important occasion that we should be talking about democracy. To those of us Maldivians, democracy meant a 5-yearly exercise of our franchise. Once in 5 years, we were democrats, we thought of democracy, and the only exercise was to cast our vote. I remember living as a child outside of the country where democracy was the norm of life. Every time I came to Maldives, nobody talked about government. And therefore, the kind of democracy that stirs up the hearts of young people when you are living abroad was totally dulled at the time of arrival in Mali. I'm talking of at the time I was about 13, 14 years of age. Today, the picture is very different. Today, as Honourable Shahid Zaki has hinted, we are once again trying to write a constitution. We all know very well a constitution carries the flavor depending on the environment outside of the People's Majlis or the Constitutional Assembly. Today, we see shift of power from the executive to the legislature. We all know that this is purely because of our grievances, our frustrations, and for many reasons, that perhaps this flavor is the coating on the Constitution. But you must remember, a People's Majlis or a Constitutional Assembly, if it is exercising too much power and the Majlis is controlled by a majority, then there will also be shift of power playing the same game that what you experience today. This is something you must remember. Why do we have to face this situation? It's because we don't live in a democracy breeding environment. This is the whole problem. If we really understand what democracy is all about, if we really want to breed democracy, then this challenge that comes between the executive and the legislature can be solved. Now I'll turn on to my responsibility this evening. I have been invited to introduce a very illustrious politician. I looked through his credentials and his biodata. I couldn't sort of put my hands on how I should start introducing. I could be either saying too little. I just now told the Honorable Mr. Evans, I might be saying too little, that could be too much, and too much could be too little. But there is a Maldivian word for people like you. We call it Pasmir Kuriru. It's a coconut tree. To the people who live in islands, we always take our similes from the immediate environment. And the coconut tree is the closest and the most important tree on an island. As my friend has just written a book about the importance of a coconut tree, the Honorable Muhammad Ibrahim Didi. The coconut tree is the most important tree to the Maldivians because we make our boats with it, we build our houses with it, we drink its water, we also make all the beautiful food items out of this fruit, and we even make medicine out of its roots. So you imagine a coconut tree which is an excellent tree in all aspects of this tree. Pasmir Kuriru. So the Honorable Robert Evans is a Pasmir Kuriruke in the field of what we are talking about, democratic governance. Mr. Robert Evans is the person who is leading as the longest serving member of the European Parliament from the London area, and he is also covering 10 of the boroughs out of 32, and he is responsible for many things, and his interest areas are very wide, everything except talking about drugs. Let me put it this way. For a Maldivian, that's a sensitive chord. In this country, this is a very big issue, but unfortunately you have not taken interest in it. Maybe next time he will be. He is interested in the rights of animals, he is interested in human rights, disabled, tourism, health, education, transport, and so on and so forth. Very wide spectrum of activities. And I'm sure a person like him, who is serving in the European Parliament for a very long period of time, who has served in various committees and who is the spokesman for the Labour in various areas of discipline, I am sure we will be learning a lot about that subject that we all want to learn about, which is democracy. So I have great pleasure in inviting the Honourable Robert Evans. Please take the floor.
Well, thank you very much indeed for those warm words of welcome, and can I say I'm delighted to be here. And you know, it seems for me a little bizarre to come halfway around the world to give a talk like this, because believe you me, I don't get radio and television covering my speeches at home, so I'm deeply flattered. And I have to tell you, for a member of the European Parliament, this is a huge audience, so I thank you all for coming here tonight. It's also, I have to say, it's my first time in the Maldives, and you may think that's strange, that here am I coming to give you a lecture on democracy, but I have followed this country from afar. I've taken an interest in it, and I think, as I will outline in the next few moments, the principles that I stand for and which I believe, and which I'm sure you share in this crucial time, will be the same. Now, just by way of introduction, what was said there was absolutely true. I mean, I've actually done a little bit of work on drugs, but I don't want to say I'm on drugs, but I've done a little bit of work on them, and interested in Afghanistan, which is of course a key country. But before I was elected to the European Parliament, I was a primary school teacher. So I'm used to audiences more likely sitting on the floor with their legs crossed, which I won't ask you to do now, but I do know that from working with young children, one has to watch for the telltale signs that the audience are bored or tired or had enough, and I will still use that criteria tonight. So if I see people dropping off to sleep or walking out, then I'll realise that my time's up. Shortly after I was elected, and I give you this by way of a warning, shortly after I was elected to the European Parliament as a very young, dark-haired, member of the European Parliament, I was invited to go down to the southwest of England to talk about education in Europe, and I thought I'd be able to manage that easily. And it was a Friday evening, I remember it well, and because when they rang me up to ask me how I'd be getting there, I said, well, I thought I'd come down by train. And I could hear the woman shaking her head over the phone, saying, well, not a good idea, Mr. Evans, because they closed the railway station in 1963. And I thought I'd started off on a bad foot. Anyway, they agreed to pick me up from the station, and I had this meeting with the number of people was very similar to the number of people in the front row. And as it had taken me two hours to get there, and there were 6 or 7 people in the audience, I was disappointed. It was taking up the whole of my Friday evening. Anyway, at the end of the evening, the secretary, the same woman who rung me and asked me to come there, she said in a very loud whisper, she said, thank you very much for coming, Mr. Evans. We've had a very interesting evening. She said, what about your expenses now? The expenses of members of the European Parliament are a fairly tense, delicate subject. So I didn't that evening, or indeed tonight, want to get into a discussion about expenses for members of the European Parliament. So I said to her, well, that's quite all right. I've just come down on the train, and don't worry about that. She said, oh, that is kind of you, Mr. Evans. She said, because as you can see, we're a very small audience, very small group, and to be honest, we haven't got very much money in our funds. And what we like to do is we like to try and save it up, and then we can invite somebody good. And as I'd been there all evening and they were going to save up then to invite somebody good, I felt that they'd sent me on my way with a lesson. Anyway, to the point of tonight's remarks, I stood first of all for the European Parliament in 1989. I wasn't elected, I was defeated clearly. At that stage, in 1989, not very long ago, many of us can remember that as though it seems like yesterday. In 1989, only 35% of the people in the world lived in conditions or lived in a country that could be described as a democracy. By 5 years later, coincidentally when I was elected to the European Parliament in 1994, there had been a startling change, and the majority of the people by that time, over 50%, were moving towards a democratic form of government. This, of course, coincided with the breakup of the former Yugoslavia, which had not been predicted, the reunification of Germany, the breaching of the Berlin Wall, which nobody had predicted, and more fundamentally, the whole breakup of the Soviet Union, which again, and peacefully, I don't think anybody had said was on the agenda in the late 1980s. And since then, in my time as a member of the European Parliament, we have seen a general strengthening of democracy across the world, with just a few exceptions. However, I think now democracy is a global phenomenon, rather being seen as an expensive luxury purely for consumption by Western societies. And even where it's abused or disputed, perhaps say in Russia, no one seriously argues for a one-party state anymore. In Venezuela, there are strong views on either side of the debate, and each side has claimed that democracy is under threat. However, the need to secure victory in the recent referendum may have actually drawn the two sides closer together. Pan-national, cross-national institutions such as the EU, the European Union, insist on democratic standards, democratic norms as a condition of membership. And you can think of the same of many of the other international organisations. The recent signature to the new treaty, the European Treaty in Lisbon, strengthens democratic institutions still further. Against that, in the West, in Europe, there may be nowadays a strong degree of cynicism towards those who inhabit the democratic institutions, whether it's the European Parliament, the House of Commons, or anywhere else. But the cynicism is really towards the politicians rather than the institution themselves. No one, I suggest, seriously challenges democracy, and in the words of the former British Prime Minister Winston Churchill, it's the least worst form of governance. And elsewhere, people are still striving for democracy. And if we went round the room tonight, we could each think of a country striving for democracy, whether it's Serbia, Ukraine, or Georgia on the outskirts of the European Union, and we could think of many other. And apart from enhancing personal, political and economic freedom and allowing us to freely argue the case for progressive and egalitarian social change to build on those freedoms, what I'd ask is, what can democracy do now for a country at the beginning of the 21st century? Some, perhaps in the global south, talk of some form of modernisation of the 20th century statist socialism. And some in the global north, the north of the hemisphere, defend neoconservatism. But what we most need at this stage, I think, is a concept of 21st century democracy to unite the widest number of people across the globe. And as I think the United States is learning to its cost in the Middle East, you cannot impose democracy, just as in the long run others discovered that you can't sustain totalitarianism. Look at what America has done and trying to impose democracy, and it's really not worked. You need to have the people with you. Today I want to cover three points, the core elements of what I think is a 21st century democracy. What are the challenges it faces, and how do we build and sustain it? The veteran former Labour Member of Parliament in Britain, Tony Benn, always talks of democracy and says, you want to ask whether you're in a democracy or whether the system is democratic, you have to look at the people who are running your country and you say, how did they get into that position of power? Who voted for them? To whom are those people accountable? And more significantly, how do we, the people, get rid of them if we don't like them? Now, in Britain, we have that with our government. We can get rid of our government if we like, but we're a monarchy. We can't actually get rid of the royal family if we don't like it, but of course everybody likes the royal family in Britain, so we don't want to. But those are the key points. You ask yourself, how do those people get into that position of power? To whom are they accountable? And how do we get rid of them if we don't like it? Now, if you can't answer any of those questions, then the country or the place you're looking at is not particularly democratic. So firstly, what then are some of the core elements, the key elements of 21st century democracy? In a world of rapid change, I think we can say that democracy measures up. Democracy satisfies with what we're looking for because it mediates disputes. Through the shared acceptance by citizens, by the people, it secures legitimacy for the tough decisions that governments and others in responsible positions in society have to make. and thus it strengthens the rule of law. If people didn't respect the rule of law, it would be very, very difficult in any country, any democracy, to enforce anything. Democracy also disciplines institutions, whether this is the free market by regulating it fairly and effectively, or whether it is the state by making it more accountable to the people. We also live in a global marketplace which impacts on all the countries. And if there is one thing that Europe learnt from the tragedies of the 20th century, when Europe fought itself twice with devastating consequences, it is that the more people trade with each other, the more they find a shared interest and they cooperate so much more. And the EU now, the European Union, is a living embodiment of that insight. The European Union now has 27 countries working closely together, representing nearly 500 million people. And the Parliament is directly elected by the people, and I'm one of the 785 members of the European Parliament, drawn from all those 27 countries. However, on trade, I think we also need a wider conception of what it means. We should recognise that trade as an idea is deeply ingrained in us, from trading information or gossip for mutual benefit, through to the complex financial transactions, which I don't pretend to understand, using monetary values and people who talk about hedge funds and everything like this. And this can work through the actions of individuals or through complex institutions. And as we've seen over the last few decades in Asia, trade can also do a great deal to rapidly tackle poverty. Whilst trade can of course occur without democracy, trade and democracy will in the long run mutually strengthen each other through the stability they bring to a society and through the stability they bring to those trading nations. And of course, without trade, whether it's artificial or not, countries find it almost impossible to survive. And Cuba is an example of that. Since they've had their trade routes cut or severely reduced, life is much more difficult there. Democracy also, my third point, challenges assumptions. It therefore forces people to justify their positions and can be a strong driver for innovation and positive and progressive change. In order for people to be able to challenge assumptions, democracy requires there to be a wider access to a full education. By giving everyone a stake in decisions, it enables parents with aspirations for their children's future to demand a better schooling and put pressure on governments to secure it. And the successful economies of the world, the most successful countries, are the ones that have got a highly trained, well-educated, well-motivated and well-paid workforces. Well-educated, well-trained, well-motivated and well-paid workforce, those are the most successful countries in the world. And all of this, I would say, opens up society, creates transparency and fundamentally builds trust between the governments and the people. So what then are the challenges that democracy faces? The immediate issues that Western democracies face are perhaps different from developing democracies. However, much of it, I would say, derives from a sense of helplessness in the feeling of unwanted, unfeeling bureaucracy. In the West, we need to deepen the definition and the operation of democracy through a much deeper, closer engagement in communities, reaching out to the most disaffected. And whether that's the youth of Algerian descent in some of the suburbs of London, of Paris, where there have been rioting, or in London to the older communities who've been long established and now finding themselves perhaps in a minority amongst the Bengali community, perhaps in the east end of London. Many of those communities feel that democracy is failing them, that they're feeling strangers and they're feeling it difficult. People need to feel a link. They need to feel ownership of their politicians. They like to know the names of their politicians. They like to be able to see their member of parliament in the street, or to know that's my member of parliament when they see him or her on the television. But before we can even aspire to reach that stage in aspirant and developing democracies, a number of key obstacles need first to be overcome. The arbitrary administration of the law, cronyism and corruption and nepotism, and the fear of change. So thirdly, in recognising the challenges we face, the challenges that I've referred to, how do we actually build 21st century democracy? And I think the crucial thing is to work from below, to develop upwards the social capital so that people have rights in return for responsibility and feel they have a stake, they feel ownership of the society in which they live. And this can be built through the rule of law, through tackling cronyism, corruption and nepotism, and through strong institutions. Through the rule of law, where democracy goes hand in hand with good lawmaking that is respected by all with high levels of trust. And so for the Maldives, I would say it's vital that there's an independent judiciary that people feel not ownership of, but they feel a trust in. They respect the judiciary and they think that the decisions, and they understand that the decisions that are being made by the judiciary are the fair and in the interests of all the people. I think we also have to recognise that we have to counter corruption, cronyism, nepotism. And this can be done by sending a clear message of no tolerance. It is vital that people in society are promoted on merit rather than simply who they know or to whom they're related or whom they met or whom they've got an acquaintance with. And for the Maldives, I think this means that the country needs a strong, independent, anti-corruption unit to strengthen the police, anti-corruption within the police unit, and generally to root out corruption so that people feel that the institutions are free of corruption, that they're fair, and that you have trust in the police force and trust in those administering the law. And I think it's also building democracy through strong institutions, building local, private, public, voluntary and mutual institutions helps strengthen democracy. If the army, the police or the civil service are the only strong institution in the country, then democracy will struggle to establish itself. We should recognise that where religious faith is deeply ingrained as a value within a country, faith institutions equally have to work cooperatively with wider social forces so that they can assist in building a more diverse range of locally accountable institutions. And I think of locally accountable institutions at all levels in this country, and I think it means as you build up to your election, which we've mentioned and been spoken of and is key to this, that we need in the Maldives to have a strong, independent election commission that people can feel confident in, and they can feel that that election commission is a body that is independent of what's gone on in the past and independent of what's going on in the future, but it's people who are strong-minded. Of course they're going to have political views themselves, because if you say there'll be people with no political views, well then what are they doing working in an election commission? Of course they're going to have political views, but they've got to be of independent spirit and mind and fair, and that's what I think you need in your election commission. And in building this democracy, we have to recognise that change can occasionally be disconcerting to those in the existing institutions who might feel threatened by it, who may see their positions not just under threat but disappearing. And we have to reassure them, we have to seek to reassure them that in the end we must not let that slow down the pace of reform. And I think over the last few months and years there's been a move in the Maldives in the right direction, but it has been slow. In some countries, and I've referred to some at the beginning, we've seen democratic transition occur in weeks after the collapse of a regime. Doesn't necessarily mean If it collapses in weeks, then it lasts, the new one that replaces it lasts or passes the test of time. But clearly that's not the sort of situation here. However, I think the danger is if we step back, the change will slow down here after the implementation of a small number of cosmetic reforms, and I don't believe that's what Maldives wants. Transition, by its very nature, means change. And that could mean a change of government. But where democracy scores above every other form of governance is it gives everyone, a second, a third, fourth, and so on, everyone in those positions, a chance. The alternation of different governing parties through the people's choice in elections is a strength, not a weakness, because if you, the people, feel you can get rid of your government in a vote in the next election if you don't like them, well then that's a great strength. All 27 countries that now make up the European Union have seen changes in government since they have established democracy. Every country in Europe in recent past has seen a change in one party and another. You think of Spain, and after the demise of Franco and they moved to democracy, there was several years of socialism under Felipe González, who was treated like a great hero, and then after a time he was thrown out and replaced by a right-wing government, and then that too was thrown out and replaced again by a left. And every country in Europe has had not necessarily a left-right switch in governments, but it has changed. And I believe that this enables everyone in the countries of Europe to have a stake in the development of their own country, to feel some sort of ownership, to feel they can get rid of their government if they want to, and also that benefits the wider European Union. And in the coming year, the Maldives will face many of those challenges that I've outlined. However, I do want to give this message. What I say today, that a move to full democratic institutions by this time next year, by this time 2008, will be the strongest guarantor of future stability in this country. Earlier this year, in July, I was in a room at the British House of Lords, the upper house of the British Parliament, when President Gayoom came to spoke. And he promised there and then to hold free and fair multi-party elections in 2008. And I spoke after him. I spoke to him as well, but I spoke to the meeting after he'd spoken. And I said, in my position as chair of the, and I'd only just been elected to it, as chair of the South Asia delegation in the European Parliament responsible for the Maldives, and not only would I be coming to the Maldives shortly, which he welcomed, but that I would hold him to his word of free and fair multi-party elections, and that I'm here today to remind everyone of the commitments that he made then. And I've seen and heard what he's been saying recently, so I'm happy to reiterate to remind him again that I think we want to be sure that we'll have free and fair multi-party elections in 2008. Words are clearly a fundamental currency of democracy. We've learned across the world through bitter experience that they are infinitely preferable to tanks, to police batons, or to money in determining how a government is chosen. I can't believe that anybody thinks you get a good government because the police are on the streets beating those people who don't like it. I don't believe anybody thinks you get a good government by those people who've got most money buying the best position. And I don't believe anybody thinks you get the best government because the government has got the tanks on the streets to suppress any opposition. However, sometimes actions have to speak louder than words, and I look forward to President Gayoom honouring his promise made last year on those elections to make sure they're free and fair, and the people of the Maldives are given the widest possible choice of exercising their democratic vote. And if that is so, I will stand by, and I'm sure the European Parliament and the rest of the world will, in recognising and accepting whoever is the choice of the people of the Maldives. And free and fair elections, therefore, must be the ultimate arbiter of the people's wishes. As I said earlier on, the European Parliament comprises representatives from 27 countries. 27 countries that, in my father's lifetime, have seen terrible conflict, with millions of people killed, homes destroyed, countries laid waste, borders pushed aside. I've spoken of, within my own lifetime, seeing the Berlin Wall breached and divided, and walls that had been put up to keep people apart have been pulled down. And when it comes to alternative forms of government, we've had a lot in Europe. We've had totalitarian, we've had authoritarian, we've had extremes of the right, we've had extremes of the left. And after all we've been through, all these 27 countries have been through, we have come to the conclusion in the European Parliament, and nobody seriously doubts it, the only way we resolve differences, and which everyone in every country is saying, is through debate. And that struggle for democracy makes us acutely aware of the issues, and the European Parliament looks on this as one of our key roles, that not only do we look at the way disputes are resolved within Europe, but we look further afield, and it's why we debate the challenges and issues that are faced in the emerging democracies of the world, and that is of course why we include the Maldives, and it's why I'm here tonight. The European Union also contributes aid and support to developing democracies. The money, of course, is not unlimited, and choices have to be made. If a government does not honour the commitments it's made publicly to us, and more importantly to its own people, then that government is likely to find that the levels of support from the European Union will diminish. The European Parliament, of course, is the guardian of the European Union, the funds on behalf of the European citizens. So if a government that we've been supporting is not answering to its promises, is not moving in the right direction, well then we will look to it and look at the whole question and look at it twice. Too often in Europe in the last century, promises were made that eventually led to people feeling betrayed. And our own bitter experience and the lessons that we've learned from it as democratic representatives has made us determined to show solidarity to the ordinary citizens in other countries facing up and going through similar changes. Now, I've been looking again, I looked before at your roadmap for reform, the agenda, which I'm sure you've all read from cover to cover and have by your bedside to look at every evening before you go to bed. And I think there's still bits in this that need to be addressed. The roadmap is there. Is the country following that roadmap as closely as it should be? Is the roadmap accurate? Is the roadmap what you want? I think it was chosen, it was developed because it does provide a real purpose for the people of Maldives in this challenging time. And there's the transition period, and there's lots of possibilities. And I've had meetings today with people who've spoken about the transition period. And I will say that during that period, the stakes are high. You're playing a difficult game of poker, if you like. Get it right, and it will be of historic importance for this country and indeed this part of the world. Get it wrong, and you've missed an opportunity that may not come up again for another generation. So don't underestimate the significance of the time and months ahead and the responsibilities that you're entrusting to people who are making those powerful decisions. So I conclude this evening by saying that those seeking to build a democratic project, to build democracy, is still, in the 21st century, a noble cause. There are few examples, and we were trying to think today, few examples of a functioning democracy that collapses. Very few examples. And somebody said, well, what about Belgium? Well, I think as I was coming out today that after 6 months Belgium has just about decided it can form a government, and people are nodding, so that must have been on the news tonight. But there have been problems in democracies, yes, of course there have. But collapse is very rare. Civil war is very rare in democracies. And so I think, and I'm sure you agree, that democracy is an urgent priority for the Maldives. We should be seeing it as a unifying global project for this coming century that is to shared by us all. Not just here in the Maldives, but in other countries too. To the west, to the east, to the north, to the south, globally in the planet. And in working together, we'll learn from each other and we'll embrace the democratic project still further. We'll see mistakes being made in other countries and we'll try not to copy them. We'll see good examples being made elsewhere in the world and we'll try and replicate those good examples. And we'll take this global project further and we'll give it a real flavour that celebrates what I think is our amazing diversity, but also recognises that in the world we have far more in common than we have differences. And it's by those insights that we draw from that engagement and we'll ensure that it's owned by everybody. And I personally, albeit haven't been in this country very long, I look forward to a fully democratic Maldives making its own real and powerful contribution to that debate. In striving for democracy, we all also achieve other objectives that can tackle poverty, can tackle ignorance, can tackle ill health, inequality and the consequences of climate change. All issues which are crucial to this country as much as to anywhere else and to which need a thriving democracy. We should also recognise that not just here but in the planet, across the world, we've made a great deal of progress, but there's still much more to do. However, the move to a wider, richer democracy, whether in the West or in developing democracies, has to come, as I've said, from below. And if we've learned anything in the 20th century, or in the 21st century so far, it is that we cannot install democracy. In the way that you can add software to your computer, or you can put new toys in your car to make you one up on your next door neighbour. But you cannot install democracies in countries. You can only build it from the base up with the sort of institutions, the sort of responsibilities that I've outlined tonight. Democracy, though, is not perfect. Democracy is not cheap. But it is, I would argue, better and less expensive than any of the alternatives. Thank you very much indeed for attention. I wish you all and the Maldives well for the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Robert Evans, for a speech that I think kept us all awake and engaged. So this is an open discussion on 21st century democracy. So for the next 10 minutes, I'd like to open the floor and invite people to come up to the podium and give a short, share your views, just for 2 minutes. So if there's anyone who would like to start us off, if you'd like to introduce yourself and then share your views for 2 minutes. Anyone who'd like to participate? I think we've got someone to start.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Ibrahim Ismail. I'm representative of Marlow constituency in both parliaments, and also chairing the committee which is drafting the new constitution. It's been very inspirational on Goebbels to hear you speak tonight, and I believe you have touched on very essential features of the whole problem that we're dealing with. It is my belief that the Maldives does not have an option but to have democracy. And I don't think the government has any option any further other than to usher in democracy. And the people of the country do not have any option except to build on those foundations. What are the challenges ahead of us? In the short term, many people might still believe that our biggest challenge is dealing with a highly autocratic, totalitarian type of government. But it is my sincere belief that it is only a shell of that totalitarianism which remains. But our biggest challenge will be to sustain what we gain in the next few months by way of promoting the rule of law. We must understand and we must recognize that by writing a new constitution, we are not going to change the mindsets of people. We're not going to change culture overnight. We're not going to change the way people think and act simply because we passed a new constitution. And I think the biggest problem we have had in the past is that it's not just the government, but even the public at large do not really have a concept of the rule of law. Because we have come from and we still remain within feudal structures, it is patronage which counts, it's patronage which people depend on to get things done, and that is going to be the single largest obstacle to promoting and maintaining the rule of law and to maintain what we have gained in the last few years and what we will be gaining in the months to come. So it would be interesting to hear from you how we could tackle that problem. We are on the precipice, we at the crossroads. I really believe we have left behind totalitarianism. But the forked road in front of us, my biggest fear is that on one side we have the path to democracy, on the other side there is very easily a path to not necessarily democracy, but to plutocracy. This comes because in the past, very few people have gained control of the entire wealth of the country. And this is going to subject our people to further humiliation, I believe. So how do we tackle this problem? How do we ensure that the rule of law can be maintained? Thank you.
Sorry, back again here. I will take only 2 minutes. I have a question to Honorable Evans. The coalition, including the opposition and the civil society, are calling upon a transitional government structure until the election of the new president through the new constitution. What justification does the government have in refusing to accept this transitional government structure? And how would you, as an MEP, in EU's point of view, accept the legitimacy of the election results if the government proceeds without accepting the transitional government structure? I hope this is brief enough. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the opportunity given to me. I would also like to ask some questions, and find solutions to our present conditions in Maldives. Our biggest fear comes from injustice. We don't have any trust. Most of the people don't have trust, and I'm sure even those who have, those are the privileged ones who can twist justice systems into their favor. Generally, there is a fear of injustice in this country. That is the main thing, one of the main things. And then there is so much of corruption. Corruption is there, injustice is there, and because of all these things that have been happening in this country for years. As you know, earlier we have been very small units of islands, communities, and now for the last about 35 years, people have been congregating on few islands more than previously. Especially Mali, you can see the situation, the absolute situation that we have come about in Maldives. You know, I still say there is no Maldives, only still there is Mali and the rest of Mali. Because we don't have any other place where it provides so much of opportunities to the people, and people are in a disparate position, disparate state. So we put all this together, we have a fear, we have very much of fear, and people don't have enough confidence and hope for the future. People seem to be dismayed, helpless. So there needs to be creation of hope and vision. That is more than a person, it is a system that we need. That we have abandoned the old system that we have been governed. It's very rightly somebody said we had a feudal system, even though it is clothed in a democratic way. We still have a feudal system in this country, and it has been there for a long time. And those people who are in power, they seem to want to continue the system. We have got rid of, we say, royal families, but still it is not like that. Some families we look upon as royal families. So the common people don't have the ownership of the governance, and this is a very sad story. And in such a situation, to give hope and trust to the people is very difficult. And I feel only a very lot of concerted pressure and advice from the foreign people only has made Maldives take different steps and development steps and change these steps. It was, we had been there, first when the chart for Maldives, Admiralty chart was going to be drawn, was requested to be drawn. I understand that the king here said there are a lot of devils in this country. There are a lot of spirits, and it is very dangerous to come here, even to survey the reeds and things like that. But I don't believe we are any different from any other people. Only we have been suppressed by time, immemorial, and earlier it was sufficient for us because we have traditions and things like that. Now suddenly it will last 35, 40 years, all these systems have broken up and nothing concrete or nothing really moral has come. Moral, I don't say in the sense of faith alone, but a real goodness. It has not been replaced by a good system. So I would suggest, I would ask the question, how you could, in such a difficult situation, you can come and you give the hope to the people and really get rid of this fear people have of injustice in this country. Thank you very much.
Thank you for those three questions. I'll try and respond to them. I think Ismail I said there's no option but democracy for the Maldives, and I think that was the whole thrust of my contribution. And the challenge, as you said, at present is not just to deal with authoritarian government, but the biggest challenge will be, once it's been replaced, to sustain it. And I think that is absolutely crucial to this. It won't be easy. I said to some people this afternoon, if the election produces a change, that will be anything but job done, game over, final whistle, everything achieved. It will just be the beginning, and then there will be an enormous number of additional challenges that will be faced by the people charged with taking on that new mantle. And through the rule of law, you've got to really make it a condition that people filters through, that everybody sees by our actions that there's positive evidence of change, and that people recognise that changes are happening, that new things are taking place. And you get rid of patronism, and then you begin to see real changes and real gains for ordinary people. So they don't believe that it's them and us, that it's just the politicians and those in positions of power that are doing well, but that the changes are filtering through society. So there'll be an enormous responsibility on any new government to be different, to recognise that they've been entrusted with new democracy, that it's theirs, and it's not theirs, it's the belonging to the country, and they've got to respect it, recognise its new powers, seek help from other countries, certainly, because it won't be easy. It won't be easy. Seek advice, get suggestions, attend all the conferences and see how other countries in similar circumstances have worked, and, as I say, copy things that work very well and try not to repeat the mistakes that others have made. But also, the people have got to be responsive to recognise that everything won't be absolutely perfect, that a new government won't be proof from making mistakes itself and getting things wrong. But it's those people in that new government have got to make as certain as they can that they are above corruption, that they're above nepotism, and they're not seen to be just a replacement of the old regime by something new. Now, Shahid spoke about and called for a coalition for a transitional government, and that, I'd say, is one option, and there I would argue that there are alternatives, and this could be, the subject for a whole lecture or a whole debate. So I want to be a little bit careful about that and how I approach that. But I spent some time recently in Bangladesh, where they have a constitutional system for a transitional government, which has 3 months under the constitution. The transitional government in Bangladesh has already been in place for over a year and is scheduled to be in position for at least another year. So beware that if you put transitional caretaker governments in place, sometimes they continue, they take on their powers, and the people rather like it. The people in Bangladesh like the government run by non-politicians, by people who are just appointed. So be careful. I think, and I'm not stating this as what I think you should do, but I think if you have an election commission that is made up of a number of people, whether it's 10, 11 or 12, perhaps coming from across society, from representing the different political parties maybe, with who are charged with the election, making sure the election runs smoothly, and making sure that the instruments of government run on in the period from position 1 to position 2. That may be an alternative, but I do counsel caution, and don't people just immediately to jump on one bandwagon or another for that difficult period. It is going to be a challenging time, and it's important that you get it right, and that you recognise that any new incoming democratically elected government is what you're after. So again, there are examples to look at in countries around the world, and different countries do different things, but I accept that in first multi-party, free and fair elections, it will be a genuine challenge. Now, Mr. Jamel said most people don't have trust, and there's a fear of injustice, they hate corruption. and that a lot of people feel that the Maldives is just Mali and the rest of Maldives. Well, I think that a democratically elected government that people feel ownership of will, if it's done properly, make people see that decisions are being made in their interests, not in the interests of a few, but in the interests of the many. And if there are developments of one island or another, people will, if it's done properly, understand why that's happening and what are the interests and what they will gain from a particular building project or a particular reclamation project that we saw one of the islands, the reclamation today. And I think also, and I spoke about education and the power of that as a tool, and I think that the more you have these structures and the positions in place in the Maldives, the more you can have a better educated population, which can be a workforce, and that the jobs in the islands can be increasingly for local people rather than for migrant people coming in from other countries. Now, every country in the world has migrant labour, and I'm not denigrating that, but you want to have Maldivian people born here in Mali and on the other islands, challenging for top positions in companies and for projects, so that the islanders feel ownership of their economy, ownership of their decisions being made, and ownership of the democracy as it moves forward. We're not trying, I don't think that building democratic institutions is not trying to replace one failed feudal system with a failed democratic system. It's got to be with a democratic system that works. And as I've said, there's any number of examples of democracies around the world that do work, that do function and do provide for the society. I think Maldives is a young country, it's a country with great hope, and that democratic change that I've spoken about, which I think everybody believes in, will be an answer for that hope and aspirations that people have. But it's got to be built, as I've said again, from the bottom upwards. It can't be imposed. It's got to be built from the bottom upwards. People have got to feel ownership of the new structures, of the new government. They've got to have trust in it. They will have to start with. And this is where the great responsibility falls on anyone who is elected, because on day one, they will have that trust, that responsibility, and the support of the people. It's very easy for that support to wither away. It's more difficult for that support to be sustained, but it will be sustained if those people use their positions responsibly, wisely, and they make decisions that are in the interests of the majority of the people, not a small few. So it's got to be a change for the people, a revolution from the people, with a small r, but it's people wanting change and people who are then prepared to support those who they entrust to make those changes. And I'm optimistic, I really am optimistic that Maldives can be turning a corner and making those changes.
So I think we're rapidly running out of time, and I think I'd like to bring the evening to a close. I'm sure Robert may have a few minutes at the end of the session when you can come up to him individually and ask extra questions. So finally, I'd first and foremost like to thank Robert Evans, MEP, for addressing us this evening. I'd like to also thank all of our speakers who took part and addressed the floor. So finally, I'd just like to invite you all to refreshments outside, and good evening. Thank you.